Welcome to Pond. My name is Mitch Stein. I'm the co-founder, CEO, and Chief Impact Officer. We want to make tech work for good. So we're highlighting and uplifting the critical parts of the impact technology ecosystem through human conversations with the leaders and shapers of the industry. Let's jump in. Meet Sevetri Wilson, a lifelong agent of social change. She was a nonprofit consultant that grew frustrated with the inefficiencies of information asymmetry and power imbalances in the sector. Now she's committed to scaling and deepening that impact by democratizing philanthropy with technology. Sevetri, thank you so much for joining us. I'd love to just kick off by having you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your company.
Absolutely. My name is Sevetri Wilson. I'm the founder and CEO of Resilia. We're a tech platform working across a double-sided market. On one side, we support nonprofit organizations, primarily streamlining their day-to-day, their training, bringing capacity to what traditionally we had done with consultants, now via software solution. We also support funders and helping them bring capacity support to the organizations that they fund. So everyone from your private foundations to charities to cities, anyone essentially deploying capital.
You know, as a founder, you've got a lot of different industries you could go into. So what really drew you to bring your talents and skills to the impact space?
One thing that really sticks out to me is just really coming from the family that I've come from, people who are always constantly giving and trying to do their best with what they have. But then also when I was headed off to college, I received the Bill and Melinda Gates scholarship, and it was one of, then at least may still be now, one of the largest scholarships that you could essentially receive. And so they fly you out to this retreat, and they're talking to you, all of us, we're 18 years old at this time, right? And they're essentially trying to embed in us. Now I look back on that, I was like, oh, okay, I see what you were trying to do there. That we're going to go off and have these like amazing careers, but we really had to always think about what were we doing to help advance society for the better, right? How are we being agents and social agents of change? And so it's interesting that now I am here trying to democratize philanthropy via technology when one of the biggest philanthropic givers made such a large impact in my life so early on.
No, that's great, and I'm glad it brought you in this direction because it's definitely much needed work. So when it comes to Resilia specifically, what's been the biggest evolution in your original vision when you started the company versus where you are today?
The company has definitely evolved quite significantly. For us, when we started off, we had often said that we're going to center nonprofits with the focus of our technology and how can we make the lives of nonprofits better. And we continue with that mission. In technology, you'll often find that the grant makers are usually the center of attention, and it's really what they need, how you can grant up to them, how you can respond to their applications. But for us, it's about really recentering the nonprofit as the focus point, because at the end of the day, they're on the ground doing the work. They're executing against the mission. And then how can we lift funders up in a way that allows us to advance their objectives, but also in a way that isn't intrusive to nonprofit organizations who've been doing the work for decades. And so for us, we originally started with nonprofits. We felt that there was an opportunity to also really work towards helping grantors and these grant makers that we had previously worked with as well, align their mission and really, as we say, scale their impact. And so we definitely have grown to expand our product line and to really create this double-sided market in which we're targeting.
You know, there's a lot of tech broadly that serves the nonprofit space, and sometimes it's easy to conflate different product categories and what different things do. What do you feel like differentiates Resilia most from competitors that you typically feel that you're compared with?
Yes. So for us, I truly believe that we are taking, as I mentioned, when I started off in the space, I was consulting. And so I would go in, sometimes we were hired by these large philanthropic organizations and they would say, hey, we need to help support our grantees. We're going to hire you guys to go in and work with them. What we realized is we would go in, we would work with these organizations, we would only have a set timeline. And because of the capacity limits that we had as consultants, as well as the nonprofits had, we were limited to what we could do. So maybe we focused on board engagement, maybe we focused on fundraising, maybe we focused on brand redevelopment, or how to reach your constituents, your constituent base. Whatever it was, we knew that by the time we left, the likelihood of that work continuing, which is like very rare. And most times the work would leave with us because organizations didn't have the capacity to continue it without us. And so I started thinking about how could we utilize technology to solve for this big problem that we're seeing, and so much money being thrown at, right? And how can we not only assist those who are doing this work, but also the nonprofits who ultimately want to benefit from that work. And so in many ways, technology for us, we're taking something that was very much so people driven and trying to embed technology into it. And so I do feel that makes us unique in that instance. And obviously we're elevating a lot of information that we're capturing via data and reporting, and really driving home the work around how we provide education to organizations, how do we provide trainings. But I do think that we are unique in our origin story and how our technology came to be.
Yeah, it's like what you mentioned about philanthropy as a starting point, that you had this exposure to sort of like the archetype of big philanthropy that helped you understand what needed to change. You had this like exposure to consulting, which can be great and can be negative, but understanding all of the implications, that just positions you so well to, sort of scale and make that more accessible.
Absolutely. And most people will say, well, are you trying to replace consultants? We're like, no, but if I had Resilia when I was consulting with these organizations, when the project was done, the organizations would have continued the work because they would have had this on-demand software to help them do so. So I don't think it's like an either or, but it very much so can be both. Or for organizations, we worked with family foundations and endowments that were much smaller, and they couldn't even afford consultants, although they knew that the organizations they were working with and funding needed support. And so for a drastically much smaller amount, we can deliver very similar experience to those organizations that they are supporting.
Yeah, I mean, we see the same thing in trying to create a tech marketplace, right? Because there are tech consultants that go find things and bring them to people. And I feel the same way, that it's like, yeah, but you scouring the internet to find that thing to recommend to your client isn't the best use of your time either. Right. So it's really just elevating everyone's work to be like higher value add. Is there, because I know you have such a deep lived experience in the sector, is there a particular cause or organization or something that you think back on when you have a hard day, or you think like, why am I in the impact space again? Like, is there something that rings true with you?
So I always say that if I weren't doing what I'm doing today, then I would definitely be focused on just like global warming, but particularly I would be focused on just restoring the coast. We see a lot of coastal restoration projects happening, but I'm from Louisiana, here in New Orleans. And when we think about the impact of the intensity of like hurricanes over time, when we think about the impact of global warming and other natural disasters on our communities and climate change, and because I lived in New Orleans, is literally like my daily lived experience. I'm already thinking about what is the next hurricane season and like thinking through that. And we see what happened in Austin, where you are currently with the impact of the snow and the entire electrical system not being able to adapt to it. And we also had challenges here with freezing temperatures in Louisiana as well at the same time. And so if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, I would definitely be in that space and thinking about how do we save our coast and not have a world where, for God forbid, that New Orleans or Miami and all these other coastal cities don't exist.
Super powerful. And I think having that mission is so critical to inform the work you're doing, because it's so aligned to what you're then doing on your day job. And I'd just be curious, since it's such a personal founding story and experience with how you started the company, how have you ensured, as you expand your team, and I know you've grown rapidly in the past year in particular, what are the cultural principles that you either look for in people or focus most on instilling once they join the team?
The first thing that comes to mind is, do you care? I think that just that thought and that question in itself matters so much, because I feel that if you're in the tech for good space, you have to really care about some things, right? Like, you have to really care about people doing well. You have to really care about the quality of people's lives, and not just your own, right? About the mass of people here, the communities in which you live in. And so I think that people truly caring about not only the work, but the missions of all the organizations that we're supporting is important. I often talk to my team members, and they were like, oh, I had this amazing conversation with this nonprofit founder, and they were just telling me about, where they started and how they've gotten to where they are today, and the struggles that they are facing, and all the good that, they could do in this world if they had X, Y, and Z services or resources. And so I think when we think about like culture fit and those who are working on our team, it really does start with that. Like, do you care?
It's so important. And it's hard to I guess it goes both ways. I was going to say it's hard to identify, but in some ways it's like the easiest thing to pick up on. You can just
yeah,
it's a hard question to ask, but it's just something I feel like you just know when you're like, oh yeah, you're good people. Yeah,
it's like, what gets you excited? Like, what do you hone in on in your responses? So I definitely think you can tell.
Yeah. And for me, I can tell from your background as a consultant, like, part of that job is being okay with rolling up your sleeves, diving into the nitty gritty, and doing something that someone's kind of outsourced purposely because they didn't want to have to mess with it.
Right.
And so it's not always like the most glamorous job, but can be really important. And I see a lot of parallels in the formation product that you offer, and taking care of that for people. So, I mean, what do you see as the biggest hurdles today in folks that either have an organization that's not yet a 501c3 or just want to start a nonprofit? I have heard so many stories since I started our business that are like, oh yeah, I started looking into starting a nonprofit, but I kind of gave up because it seems like a lot of paperwork.
Task. Yeah. So one of our products is formation, in which we help nonprofit organizations go through the incorporation and exemption process. And we have 100%, as we say, TurboTax process, where an individual can come online and do it themselves, but not by themselves, which is something that we say. And we ensure that, one, here are the critical things that you need to come with. And then we essentially just make it as easy as possible to go from incorporating your nonprofit in whatever state you're in, to going through the process of getting your tax exemption and filing the 1023 form with the IRS. And so we definitely try to make it very much so hassle-free. And I think that's why, our approval ratings are always through the roof, because we just have done this so much that we got to know, we know the method to the madness.
Yeah, that's great. And I guess on the other side of products that you offer, I've seen firsthand the level of modern tech adoption at foundations, grant-making organizations, is really low. Why? I just don't. It's tough for me to wrap my head around, and I'm sure for a lot of people, it seems like the foundation, the grant maker, should be leading the way on a lot of stuff that they want to see in their grantees. So, why do you think that's still so far behind in a lot of instances?
I think it's just a fear of having to adopt technology. I think it really is that simple. It's like, hey, these Excel sheets and Word documents and endless emails haven't failed us yet, but it hasn't helped us yet either. And people just really have a hard time of doing something new and because they also are challenged by, okay, how long is this going to take? And, what is my fear or tolerance level of technology, to be able to adopt this? I'm not a techie person, so, how am I going to go and like bring this new technology software in-house and then ask other people to adopt it as well? And I think what they will find if they do is that, oh, wow, this wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And oh, wow, this has made my life a lot easier. And also, it has very much so made the impact of our work that much more clear, and giving us ability to understand like where we are and where we want to go and how we can actually measure what that success looks like. I think technology powers funders to be able to do that. They really just have to get out of their own way and embrace that change. I think 2020 definitely taught everyone that we need to step into the technology age, and more and more things need to be digitized, and we need to be able to essentially work from anywhere, and give people also the accessibility to work from anywhere. And so hopefully, we can get these funders and, other grant makers to come around.
Yeah, it's funny. I think what you said about the fear is, I see that so much, where it's even just someone's like, oh, tech's not my problem. I'm not a tech person. That's like someone else's problem. And it's just, if you don't have an understanding of the power of technology, you don't need to be a coder. I mean, both of us run tech
I'm
companies,
not a technologist.
I am not a technologist, right? So I actually think we are well positioned to be a bit of a bridge for folks to be like, no, it's strategically important for you to learn about from a like functional strategy level. You don't need to be your IT person to appreciate that, hey, adopting something like Resilia could, have XYZ impacts on what you're doing, and you can't just defer that to your IT person to sort out.
Absolutely. And I am a huge believer. I think often a lot about just the economic and wealth gap that we see. So the economic and wealth gap that we are seeing in this country, and particularly when we think about the gap between Black and Brown people, which there have been so many different data points that have said that, over the next 20, 30 years, Black and Brown people will be like the poorest they've ever been. I think one reason for that is the technology divide. And technology has helped widen that gap significantly faster than it would have been without it. And so I actually think it's not only necessary for funders to adopt technology, I actually think it's a responsibility that they adopt it, and that they also leverage it and introduce it to their grantee partners who are directly impacted by this wealth and economic divide.
It's akin to, in general, when we talk about racial justice, that silence is violence, right? If you're not helping to be part of the change, then you're part of the problem.
Absolutely.
Which is be a tough pill to swallow from like a product messaging perspective to your audience. But I don't know, and I know we're talking more about this in the future, but it's like, okay, you've all gone out and made your public statement about how important racial equity is to you, could start with tech.
Absolutely.
And as we talk about tech and how that goes between the for-profit and nonprofit space, I also, just as someone that meets with and knows lots of founders now in the space on both sides of the house, either running a nonprofit or a tech provider, and you've had great experience on both sides. Is there a lesson? It's a two-part question. Is there a lesson you wish more tech founders appreciated from the greatest nonprofit leaders you know? And vice versa, is there a lesson you wish more nonprofit leaders would adapt from your experience running a successful tech business?
Well, they teach us in tech whether or not we adopt it truly. And two things that are aligned is that ideally you're trying to run your tech company, particularly starting up, as lean as possible. Nonprofits teach us that the best, how to run an organization as lean as possible, to be very mindful of resources and to do a lot more with a lot less. And I think that from the technology end, we can double down on that, even once we've raised capital, even once we have been able to start to like scale our companies. On the other side, I think that nonprofits can definitely learn from technology about how do I capture my audience in a way and continue to make them continuous donors, to help them buy in continuously around like the work that we're doing, and to utilize technology to like amplify their message to new people on an ongoing basis. And so not just like the run-of-the-mill people that often come and those people you count on their checks every single year, they're your go-to people all the time. But how can you continuously introduce new people to what you're doing and your mission and create new ambassadors for your organization? I think that tech does that well. We're constantly thinking about acquiring new customers or acquiring new users or getting more eyeballs on our newsletters. And I think that's definitely something that nonprofits can learn from tech.
Yeah, it's like, don't look at tech as the opposition. It's like, it's a partnership, and can be more symbiotic, and really should be, because it's ultimately achieving your mission, which is why you're in the line of work to begin with.
Absolutely.
No, I think that's super helpful. I did notice, I was reading up a little bit on your bio, and I noticed a claim about being a really big history buff. And I have to say, I have been like the History Channel's #1 subscriber since I was like 7, and I love history. So from one history buff to another, is there a historical figure in the philanthropic or kind of like broader charitable realm that really inspires you, or you just really love the story and keeps you motivated?
So we actually just did like a whole blog feature around particularly Black philanthropists. And we introduced people that maybe people didn't realize were philanthropists. And I don't know if I have like just one single person that stands out to me, but one person that always comes to mind when people talk about charity is Tom Joyner, which he's still alive, so not that far down history, because he was my first memory of philanthropy. And he used to always support HBCUs and giving money to HBCUs. And I remember just riding around with my late mother, to school, picking me up from like practice. And I used to always hear these Tom Joyner commercials and how he significantly used to like just push people support towards HBCUs. And so that one comes to mind. Because it's one of like my earliest memories of particularly like a Black philanthropist. And it was so subtle. And at the time, I didn't correlate that to, oh, wow, this man has raised like millions of dollars for HBCUs by having a platform and a voice on a nationally syndicated radio station and utilizing it to send resources to an institution that has been largely underserved, right? Institutions all across the country. And I was like, how powerful is that? Looking back as a kid.
I mean, that's amazing that you had that inspiration. And if I can say, I genuinely see and already think that you are having that inspiration in a lot of people. I think that your visibility as a successful Black woman tech founder serving the impact space sets an amazing example for so many people. I guess I would be curious to know, how does that feel for you to be the first in a lot of people's minds to occupy that space? Like, what does that bring to mind for you, or what are your goals within that context?
So I have a lot of firsts for sure. But I always kind of think about it in the context of, but I won't be the last. And I have to ensure that I take what I have gained and learned and help pull other people up. I think particularly for just like minorities, like we can't get to the top and be like, okay, I'm going to help someone now. I've made it, quote unquote. Now I have to, I'm going to look back and try to help people up. We literally have to lift as we climb, because if we climb to the top and then look down, the gap, right, is going to be so far down. You're going to look down, you're not going to see anyone. And so I do think that I'm very mindful of trying to utilize the resources that I do have, and particularly the knowledge that I've learned, to pay it forward and help others who have come from places that I've come from, and have similar backgrounds, or people who are just many times just need a break. And I think even I've been in a position where I'm like, man, I just need a break. And someone has to be the person that like gives someone a break. And so I even think about that in my journey.
It just couldn't ring truer for me. I mean, I don't come into this space as someone that's made it. Like, I'm in the throes of it.
Likewise.
Like, I would never, and I think it's funny in a lot of ways in society, we think like, okay, I'll speak on this topic once I'm, the next Elon Musk. But it's like, that's not actually that interesting, because this is real. What we're going through right now is the struggle is real. And what you said about a break, I mean, compassion was what I needed most for the last 6 months, which I just think is in very short supply in white dominant culture.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, man, I just talked to so many founders, so many people, and we even do contracts. I have far less than a lot of corporations and funders, et cetera, way smaller budgets. And I have, companies who are even smaller than me who come to me and say, this is what we're trying to do. Can you pilot this? And I always try to do what I can, because I know like what it means to be like that person that says yes, right? And how you can truly change not only someone's lives, but like a whole team. And I think that compassion, like empathy, and to really think about your decision making and like the power of decision making into literally changing people's lives is so important. And I think that people shouldn't take it lightly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think back on just in the past few months, people that took the call, right, or wanted to be helpful. And even if they weren't totally sure they were going to be a part of it, like, I just want to hear you out and help. And I just think, I mean, now I'm such a sucker. I'm kind of a softie. So like anyone who DMs me on LinkedIn, I'm like, yeah, let's talk. Like,
let's
yeah. People sending me their like fundraiser ideas, and I'm like, don't build that yourself. Go here. Like,
right. Just giving some advice, some like points, and it goes a long way.
But totally, it 100% does. Well, last question I have for you, given that, as we just covered, we're in the throes, nowhere near the final inning. 5 years from now, what would you say is the number one goal for Sevetri as a person and for Resilia as a company?
So for Resilia, it's definitely creating a category defining product in which we are solidified as like thought leaders in our space, and have proved with data information of how we have collectively moved the space forward in a way that is aligned to some of these big thought leadership ideas that are coming to place now, right, from out of 2020, of people trying to realign and say, what does the next 5 years look like for us? I feel like we're very much so going to be a part of those individuals who have really begun to say, yeah, there's a change that needs to happen, and this is how we're going to proceed moving forward, particularly in our space and in the philanthropic space, and just even in like the tech for good space. I think that we have a long way to go, but I do feel that we can make some progress with those people who are committed to seeing progress happen. Personally, 5 years from now, for Founding, we're always at the thought, like personally, what do we do personally? So I'm always thinking about how I help continue like my mother's legacy. And so, last year, I was fortunate to start an endowment in her name at my alma mater. And so I think like for 5 years, and with like a 5-year commitment to like grow it. And so for me, I think over the next 5 years, it's definitely continuing to build upon that legacy that I am creating in my mother's name, because that's something that's like significant to me personally.
Amazing. It's just your mission all across the board. That's
I
the
am,
goal, which I really love.
my mentor were like, this is how we said we're gonna die poor and all used up, and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can't take it with you, right?
Yeah,
So that's great. Well, Savitra, this has been really fun. I'm really glad we got to catch up and really appreciate you being so candid and open, and glad we get to talk again soon here in a couple of weeks. I'm really looking forward to it.
sounds great. Look forward to it as well.
Thanks for coming by. Be sure to visit joinpond.com and jump in when you're ready.